Of course, if you're anything like me, you've accepted that mainstream politics doesn't offer real solutions, just variations on a theme, and even apparently vividly different political figures ultimately have the same interests at heart. For example, many of the policies, environmental policies that Trump was condemned for, were inaugurated by Obama and are now being carried out by Biden. I spoke to Nick Estes. He's an academic of American studies as well as a native person of the country of America. He speaks to me very clearly, candidly, eloquently, and brilliantly about the kind of activity that Joe Biden has sanctioned that means that sacred sites for Native American people are being annihilated, demolished, and dug up in search of copper in order to keep electric cars on the road. Is the Green New Deal more of the same? Is Biden, when it comes to it, indistinguishable from Trump? Have a look at this conversation and decide for yourself.
So to kind of get to the facts of the matter, in 2008, there was a global financial crisis. In the United States, there was also what we now know as the fracking revolution. Fracking technology, was kind of being implemented. It was hydraulic fracturing. It was a way to get at previously inaccessible or expensive forms of oil and gas in the Earth's crust. And so these two things coincided: a global financial collapse as well as a fracking revolution. Under Obama's administration, he implemented what he called the all of the above energy policy, or American energy independence. And this meant increased domestic oil production so that the United States could wean itself off of foreign oil, especially like in places like Iran or Venezuela, and began implementing harsher sanctions against those countries as a result. And this is something that we talk about as Indigenous people. We understand geopolitics. We understand why they're coming after our land and why they're coming after our resources. And so this began the fracking revolution, and domestic energy production, or domestic oil and gas production in the United States under Obama, increased 88%. Right. And you also have the creation of the tar sands in Alberta, Canada, which has created a dead zone larger than the state of Florida. I don't know if that means anything to your listeners, but it's a huge area of land that has been completely destroyed. They built walls around it to essentially extract this very dirty oil. And the Canadian government subsidize a lot of these projects, a lot of these Canadian corporations. Canada is often seen as, the nice alternative to the United States, but Canada is also home to 60% of the world's mining corporations that plunder the rest of the planet, including my homelands where I'm from. And so they put through pipelines such as the Keystone XL pipeline. And so this is where the fight against the pipelines erupts. This is where the Dakota Access Pipeline really kind of galvanizes Indigenous people. It was actually the Keystone XL pipeline for us, but after we sort of won the Keystone XL pipeline fight, then we switched to the Dakota Access Pipeline fight, and we can talk about that later. But the outcome of that was that under Obama, that pipeline was finished and then sort of finalized under Trump. And we often attribute a lot of the kind of bad energy policy and the expansion of a very aggressive expansion of the fossil fuel economy to somebody like Trump. But in fact, a lot of those policies happened under the Obama administration. So for us, we're in this kind of trap of like Democrats and Republicans when basically it's kind of the same wing of the same kind of bird. And so it's a little bit difficult, even though we would prefer, to be colonized less or more kindly in some regards than the more aggressive form of Trump. Whereas Trump, represented something that was very, it was a naked form of colonialism that was like very easy to grasp. He valorized genociders like Andrew Jackson and John Wayne and things like that. So that was a little bit easier for us. But now that we have Biden, a kind of return of Obama's policy, what we're seeing, and I'm kind of bringing this back to the question you were talking about, a green transition. What we're seeing under the Biden administration is another kind of energy boom and another kind of energy rush. And, this happened it also began under Obama and was very much aggressively expanded under Trump. But Biden, with his $2 trillion green transition plan, he commits to transitioning the entire federal fleet, all the cars that the federal government owns, into electric vehicles. That requires an immense amount of metal, such as copper, right? And things such as lithium. Where are these things going to come from? Right now, China is like the number one producer of copper and lithium. And the thing with copper and why it's so important is that you can't, the kind of copper that's needed in renewable technologies like electric vehicles, wind turbines, solar panels, has to be very pure. It has to be mined, and it has to be mined. It can't be recycled. So it has to come from somewhere, right? And so, Biden gave this kind of speech during his campaign, and it wasn't a public speech, but he gave a speech to one of the largest mining associations in the United States, basically saying we're at a dawn of a new era of mining. And just like, the Obama administration wanted to increase domestic oil production to wean ourselves off of foreign imports, we as the United States want to also increase our production and extraction of what we are calling strategic minerals. And that includes lithium, right? That includes copper. And so under the Obama administration, there was this rider to the National Defense Reauthorization Act. And I'm sorry if this is a little bit boring because it kind of gets into the weeds a little bit about this stuff, but there was the rider to the National Defense Reauthorization Act back in 2012 or 2003, I can't remember. In Arizona congressman or senator named John McCain added it basically to sacrifice or to designate an area of national forest or an area controlled by the a national forest in Arizona, which is also an Apache sacred site, to be opened up for mining, copper mining, by a company called Rio Tinto. And the idea was that if this mine went forward, it would produce the 1/5 of the United States need for copper, anticipating this green transition, anticipating this green renewable revolution, right? But still dedicated to the kind of extraction mentality and the colonial mentality that we're going to sacrifice. It would be like, I don't know, what's the big church in England?
St. Paul's Cathedral, maybe, or Westminster Abbey.
So imagine if an Australian mining company came in and said, hey, there's a big, huge copper reserve underneath this cathedral, and we're going to have to blow a hole in it that's going to go down at least or almost 2 or 1.5 miles or over a kilometer down into the earth, and we're going to have to destroy the entire land around it. We can't compensate you for it. We're just going to do it, right? Imagine how pissed off people would be. I mean, there would be I'm sure there'd be riots in the streets or something like that. People would be very upset because you're attacking an area that's considered a sacred site, a church, a place of reverence. I'm not a Christian, but that's what I imagine Christians do. I think they go there and they pray to the God.
That's right. Yeah,
that's right.
You got it. Don't you ride roughshod over my culture. That's my sacred heritage.
They eat like wafers, right? And they drink.
Yeah, we have wafers. Yeah, we got some wafers in there. I mean, it does make it seem particularly offensive that would be somehow framed as a Green New Deal, if part of the Green New Deal is to blow up sacred sites of the indigenous people of the land. I mean, listening to you describe and explain that, Nick, it's difficult to feel optimistic about the Democratic Party, Biden, or much of the rhetoric around climate change, climate concern, and also, may I add to that, the kind of gestural, cultural compensations that are offered in the realm of diversity. Surely if there was any respect at all, the meaning, respect, as long as the respect doesn't affect our economic interests. Gestures, as long as those gestures don't impede the ability of powerful people to continue to pursue their interests. For me, this makes when it comes down to it, at least Donald Trump, as you said, naked. You know what you're dealing with. You know what you're dealing with. This is what capitalism is. This is what capitalism looks like. And it makes me feel that much of the left's sort of convulsions and hysteria around Trump was an inability to face up to the reality of the political and economic systems that have been at work. You know, you tell me, you're a historian, in your country for, you know, a couple of centuries. Makes me feel like, you know, like I've heard people romanticize about quite recently about the Constitution as a beautiful document, and like I was saying, well, you know, but when they say men, what do they mean? You know, which men, etc. These are sort of not necessarily novel arguments, but they certainly arguments under which you can necessarily continue to underwrite the sort of American exceptionalism or presumed rectitude in American social politics. So where does it leave you as an Indigenous man and as a historian when regarding the sort of the policies of Biden, the rhetoric of Biden, and the sort of renewed optimism and a cultural level? How do you see that? Do you see it as sort of insidious, sort of deceptive, pointless? And where do you put your political optimism? If you're enjoying this conversation, join me over at Luminary for the rest of our discussion. For all the latest episodes of Under the Skin, go to luminarypodcast.com to start your free trial. See you there, and thank you.